He told her to move like she was just background. She didn't answer, just stood, holding a boarding pass like a loaded weapon. The moment someone said her name, the air changed. He wasn't challenging a passenger. He was challenging the woman who owns the plane. A polished black tote hung from her forearm, same one her father gave her the day she was named Regional VP. That was before the whispers called her too ambitious, before she stopped waiting for anyone to open doors. Now, she didn't knock. She walked through. Row 1E. She found it quickly. Window seat. Quiet. She adjusted her blazer, ready to review briefing notes for the policy summit in D.C. The one she'd be opening as the youngest black CEO of Orion Air. No one on board knew that yet, and she didn't need them to, not until... "Ma'am, I need this row." The voice came sharp, entitled. Not a question. A command. Naomi turned slowly. A man, late 50s, tall and casually expensive. His coat already draped across 1E and 1F, gray cashmere, folded with the precision of someone used to being obeyed. "This is my seat," she said calmly, lifting her boarding pass. He didn't look, didn't blink. Just smirked like the universe had handed him an amusing delay. "That's adorable," he said, voice dipped in mock sympathy. "But I have a medical note, and I always take this row. You'll be fine further back, sweetheart." She didn't move. His tone sharpened. "You really don't want to make this a thing." A hush fell across first class. Someone lowered a newspaper. A couple glanced over, uncertain whether to watch or pretend not to. Silence thickened like fog. Naomi stood steady, voice even. "I booked this seat 3 months ago." "Then call whoever you need to call," the man replied, folding his arms. "But people like me, we don't get moved." He said it so easily, so publicly, like fact. Naomi exhaled once, small, silent. The kind of breath you take when your skin remembers every room it was never invited into. A nearby attendant hovered but didn't step in. She looked young, nervous. Naomi raised her phone, the screen glowing. "This confirms seat 1E. Again, he didn't look. Instead, he leaned in a little, just enough for only her to hear. "You've already made everyone uncomfortable. Be gracious, and step aside." Her eyes didn't flinch. Not at him. Not at the humiliation curling beneath her ribs. "I'm not moving," she said. Not loud, not soft, but final. He chuckled, shaking his head like she was a child having a tantrum. Then he sat down. In 1 East draped the coat over his lap, and closed his eyes like nothing had happened. That's when it happened. A small voice, somewhere to the left. "Wait. Isn't that Naomi Carter?" The man didn't open his eyes, but around them murmurs began. "From Orion Air? She's the CEO." It spread like static, whispers, then silence again, except now the silence had turned. It wasn't awkward anymore. It was electric. Naomi didn't speak. She didn't need to. She just stood there, still holding her boarding pass, while a dozen strangers watched a man refuse to move, and watched her refuse to shrink. The attendant looked toward the galley, uncertain. But Naomi? Naomi simply adjusted the strap on her tote and waited. Not for permission. Not for sympathy. Just for whatever came next. He hadn't moved. Not an inch. Not even when the cabin crew returned. This time with an older flight lead. Calm, but visibly tense. "Sir," he began, polite but firm. "We do ask that all passengers take their assigned seats for departure." The man didn't even open his eyes. "I already told your junior. Medical condition. I require space. Doctor's note on file. I'm not moving." He said it loud enough for everyone to hear, like he wanted to claim the air too. Naomi didn't flinch. She stood upright, steady, as if the carpet beneath her heels were solid ground no matter how the world tilted. The flight lead turned to her. His eyes were apologetic. "Miss, we're working on a solution." That word again. Solution. The one they used when they didn't want to say problem. The one that always meant please disappear quietly. Passengers watched, blinking. Nobody spoke, but their eyes said everything. Some sympathetic, some anxious. A few annoyed, not at him, but at her, for not letting it go. Naomi didn't argue, didn't raise her voice. She just looked at the lead attendant and said, "This seat was mine before his blanket." The attendant hesitated, then turned to the man again. "Sir, we may need—" He snapped, eyes now open. "She can wait, or go back. Pick a seat in economy if she wants." There it was again, the assumption that she didn't belong here, that her place was behind a curtain. Naomi's voice remained unchanged. "I'll wait." And so she stood, unmoving, still clutching her phone and that tiny square of digital proof, while he leaned back like a king in a castle that had never been stormed. Minutes passed. No one else dared get involved. The crew retreated. Passengers retreated inward. Everyone waited for the discomfort to end on its own. But Naomi didn't move. She remembered her father's voice, the way he used to say, "They'll try to measure your worth before they ever hear your voice, so let them watch your silence." So she let them. The air felt thinner now, pressurized not by altitude but tension. A woman across the aisle uncrossed her legs and shifted forward. Like maybe, just maybe, she would say something. But she didn't. Then a low beep. Naomi's phone lit up. One message, short and discreet. "Initiate SW2. She tapped it once. A small movement. Quiet. Unseen. Somewhere in the cabin systems, the airline's internal support protocol activated. One only a handful of senior staff even knew about. A soft cascade of network disruptions began rolling out, invisible to passengers. The man's Wi-Fi icon vanished. He frowned. Tried reconnecting. Nothing. He toggled his settings. Still nothing. "Stupid connection," he muttered, frustrated. Naomi didn't glance his way. She just stood, watching her own reflection in the dark window beyond row 1A. She could feel the shift beginning. Not in him, but in the room. It was like watching ice melt. Slow. Silent. Unstoppable. And behind her, someone finally whispered it aloud. "Why won't he move?" That whisper wasn't to her. It wasn't even a question. It was the first crack in the room's silence. And that was all it ever took. The man adjusted his coat again, more forcefully this time. He didn't like the whisper, or the weight it carried. He opened his mouth, about to say something sharp, maybe a threat, maybe another justification, but paused when he saw the lead attendant returning. This time, he wasn't alone. Walking beside him, calm as a mountain before a storm, was a tall woman in a deep navy blazer with silver crest pins on both sides of her collar. Her ID badge caught the light. Beneath her title, 2 words stood out: Director Liaison. She didn't smile, didn't greet anyone. She simply approached the man with steady footsteps, nodded politely, and asked a single question. "Sir, is there a reason you're refusing to comply with your assigned seating?" The man puffed up, ready to wield all the power his wealth and skin had granted him for decades. "I already told them, medical condition. I always get this row. I fly often, gold member. That woman's just making a scene." The liaison turned her gaze to Naomi, then to the screen in her hand. "There is no medical note on file." The man blinked. "It was faxed. I've done this before." "Not on this aircraft," she replied calmly. "And not with this seat." Passengers were no longer pretending not to listen. A few leaned forward. One had their phone lowered to their knee, recording silently. Another couple whispered, not about Naomi now, but about him. Still, the man tried to summon his old tools: tone, posture, dismissal. "Look, I don't care who she is. I'm not being told what to do by—" But he stopped, because he saw it. A small badge tucked into Naomi's tote. He leaned to read it, and something in his chest recoiled, like the air had betrayed him. "Naomi Carter," he muttered, lips curling. That Naomi Carter? No one answered. They didn't need to. The way the attendant beside him stiffened, The way the liaison slightly straightened her posture. The way the people in 2A and 3C exchanged wide glances. All of it confirmed what he didn't want to believe. She wasn't just a passenger. She was the woman who ran the airline. And for the first time since the confrontation began, a flicker of fear crept into his eyes. Not because he'd be removed, but because he might not be above her. He looked at Naomi again, not like a threat anymore, like a problem. "I didn't know who you were," he said, voice clipped. Naomi didn't blink. "You did." He swallowed. Silence. Then, somewhere behind them, a soft voice, a different passenger this time, called out, "Just give her the seat, man." Everyone saw what happened. It was too soft to sound like rebellion, but just loud enough to feel like judgment. The man stood halfway, stared at Naomi, at the tote, at the aisle, and then sat back down, folded his arms. "I'm not moving. She can have my company apologize later if she wants. But I'm not moving now." The liaison didn't flinch, but her hand tapped twice on her tablet. "Understood," she said, and quietly stepped away. No threats, no warnings. Just protocol being set in motion. Naomi didn't move either. But in her chest, something shifted. Not victory. Not yet. But clarity. He wasn't afraid of her title. He was afraid of what it meant when a black woman no longer asked. He sat like a man surrounded by invisible shields, arms crossed, jaw locked. But the armor was cracking. Everywhere around him the air had shifted. The eyes on him no longer carried curiosity. They carried verdict. No one had yelled. No one had pushed. And yet the weight of the room now bore down like a verdict delivered in silence. Naomi remained still. Not passive. Deliberate. Her hands rested lightly against the handle of her tote. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't gloating. She was simply undeniable. Across the cabin someone whispered, "He's still not moving?" The question wasn't about seats anymore. It was about why he was willing to make himself small, just to keep someone else even smaller. Then, unexpectedly, a woman from 3D leaned forward. Middle-aged, blazer, steel gray hair swept into a tight bun. She didn't stand, but her voice carried with just enough weight. "Everyone here saw you disrespect her, not because you needed space, because you assumed she didn't belong." A ripple of agreement moved like wind through tall grass. The man stared ahead, trying to drown it out. His nostrils flared. He reached for his phone. Swiped. Still no signal. Still cut off. The liaison hadn't returned, but her absence didn't matter now. What Naomi had activated wasn't just a protocol. It was exposure. And exposure was power's worst enemy. The man turned his head, slow and controlled, like he was pulling every ounce of restraint from a place deep inside him. "You could have handled this differently," he muttered toward Naomi, though he didn't meet her gaze. "You could have pulled rank quietly, without making it a public thing." Naomi's voice was steady. Software. "You made it public the moment you said, 'People like me.'" His jaw flexed. "That's not what I meant," he hissed, loud enough for Rose around to hear. But his voice didn't carry confidence anymore. It carried history, of all the times he had meant it. Naomi tilted her head slightly, not accusing, not apologizing. "If you think dignity is something I need to earn quietly," she said, "then you don't understand what this is about." He laughed once, short, bitter. The sound of a man trying to lift himself with mockery before gravity finishes the job. "Oh, please. Everyone wants to be a victim these days." A woman gasped softly in row 2. A man shook his head. No one laughed. He looked around now, really looked, and what he saw wasn't an audience. It was a mirror of everything he'd just revealed. Across from him, Naomi sat down, not to give in, but because she had already won the seat with her stillness. She placed her tote gently beneath the seat, adjusted her posture, and for the first time since takeoff prep began, she exhaled fully. He glared at her, needing to say something, anything, that would restore the illusion that he still controlled the room. But before he could speak, a low male voice came from the aisle. "Sir," it said, calm and steady. "It's over." Everyone turned. A tall, sharply dressed black man stood in the aisle, broad-shouldered, mid-40s. His airline ID read, Security Liaison, Orion Air Executive Team. His expression was unreadable, but the authority in his voice was clear as glass. "You need to leave this row now, or we'll initiate full grounding protocol." The man opened his mouth, then froze. Because this time, even his arrogance could see it. There were no more doors to hide behind. The man didn't speak. For the first time, he looked like someone who had run out of language. Not because there weren't words, but because none of them would change what everyone now understood. He stared up at the security liaison, tried to read him, intimidate him, outrank him. But the man didn't blink. And in that quiet moment, something Naomi had seen 100 times before happened again. He calculated the room. Not morality, not fairness, just risk. His eyes darted from passenger to passenger, their postures, their judgment. Some held phones, others folded arms. One man in the aisle had that look. The look that said, "I dare you." It was a new territory for him, one where silence wasn't protection anymore. It was proof. The liaison didn't move. His tone didn't change. "Make a choice." The man gripped the armrest. Every cell in his body wanted to shout, to reclaim control, to flip the script. But there were no more lines left in the role he'd written for himself. Naomi looked out the window. The wingtip glinted in afternoon light. She didn't speak, but her stillness echoed louder than anything in that cabin. It wasn't pride. It wasn't revenge. It was the kind of strength that doesn't flinch, because it knows the cost of silence far too well. The man's lips parted again. "Fine." He stood, every movement brittle, every limb resisting gravity like it resented the ground itself. He didn't look at her. He didn't look at anyone. He just grabbed his coat, yanked it from the armrest, and muttered, "This isn't over." The liaison's voice followed behind him, quiet and final. "It already is." The entire row watched as he walked toward the back of the cabin, not because he was forced, but because power, once fractured, doesn't echo the same way twice. As he disappeared past the curtain, the silence didn't cheer. No applause, no vindication. Just that long exhale again, the one passengers didn't know they'd been holding. Naomi leaned back in her seat, slowly, gently, her tote still at her feet, untouched. For a moment, she closed her eyes, not in relief, in recognition. Because she'd seen it before. At conferences where she was the only one who looked like her. In boardrooms where silence grew louder the moment she spoke. In meetings where her expertise was applauded. After a man repeated it louder. This moment wasn't new. It was simply public. A flight attendant gently approached with water, placed it on her tray without a word. Their eyes met for half a second. No apology. Just respect. Naomi gave a small nod. And somewhere in the cabin, far back, far removed, a phone buzzed. A post had gone live. A video. No hashtags yet. No headlines. Just one caption, under dimmed footage of a woman standing silent, while power folded itself into shame. She never raised her voice. She didn't have to. And the world, watching, was just about to whisper back. The flight was in the air now. No announcements, no further disruptions. Just the low hum of engines and the occasional chime of seatbelt signs. But something had changed. Not in the flight plan, in the atmosphere. The cabin had recalibrated itself around a different center. Naomi Carter wasn't just a passenger anymore. She was gravity. She sipped her water slowly. Not as ritual, but as reclaiming. Every small movement, setting her tote upright, folding her tray down, was laced with grace. Not performative. Grounded. Across the aisle, someone reached out with a napkin folded carefully in half. No words. Just the small gesture of someone who'd been watching, and saw more than a moment. They saw meaning. Naomi accepted it with a nod. No smile. No need. From the front of the cabin, the older attendant reappeared briefly. Her eyes scanned the first few rows, confirming that the tension had dissipated. When they landed, there would be protocols, reports, media escalation. But for now, there was peace. In the back rows, phones lit up with signal. The video was already making its way across timelines and continents. Different angles, snippets. The moment the man said, "People like me," the silence that followed, the stillness that answered. No dramatic music. Just reality, finally exposed without flinching. In the seat beside her now, empty and freshly reset, Naomi placed the boarding pass she'd never once let go of onto the armrest, creased at the corner, slightly bent, but intact. A symbolic object, not for the seat itself, but what it had survived. 1,000 dismissals, 100 lowered glances, and one man who still believed that silence was weakness. But silence was the strategy. She glanced at it, then picked it back up. From the window, clouds moved past like silent cities. Below them, somewhere, that man would land with no audience, no echo, just consequence, and perhaps eventually, understanding. Because even the loudest men eventually run out of room. Naomi reached into her tote and pulled out her father's pen, the one he'd handed her outside the courthouse after she won her first discrimination case at 25. "This pen's not for writing names," he told her. "It's for drawing the lines they cannot cross again." She held it for a second, then tapped it lightly against the pass. Not to mark it, just to remember it. She knew when they landed, there would be calls, statements, maybe press. But what she'd built in this cabin wasn't about headlines. It was about the unseen shift, the subtle rewrite of hierarchy, right in front of people who'd never questioned it. And the man? He wouldn't remember her name out of admiration. He'd remember it out of reckoning. As the wheels lowered and the pressure inside the cabin changed, Naomi's eyes drifted toward the clouds again. One last breath. One slow exhale. And then, in the quiet, as the flight touched down, her whisper landed with it. "For seat 1E, she said softly, "and for all the ones they tried to take." The seatbelt light flickered, and the world below had already begun to change. What would you do if someone tried to erase your dignity in public? Tell us in the comments. And if Naomi inspired you, share this story. Someone out there needs to hear it.